Hey, everybody, and welcome to the beginning of week 4 of our semester. Remember, every week starts Wednesday since we started the semester on a Wednesday, and we finish on a Thursday. So, Wednesday to Tuesday are our weeks, and as you know, we have just started week 4. I hope you are all doing well, and I hope that you're taking good care of yourselves and that you're able to, enjoy the summer. All right, so over the last 2 weeks, certainly week and a half, we've been um, talking about in the course. The modules are on China and the evolution of earliest parts of China and the beginning of China. We've talked about the movement from the Harappan uh, civilization, which was the earliest river system in the Indus Valley in what is modern day Pakistan, and the rise of Hinduism and Buddhism there. And then we're looking at China and all the way into Japan and the influence of China and Chinese characteristics all the way into Japan and Korea. Now, there are two things that I really want to focus on in this discussion board, and one is Buddhism and one is Confucianism, and I want to give you a little bit of history about them, and then pose the question for the week that I want you to think about. So, when we look at Buddha and Confucius, they are contemporaries. One, obviously, in China, Confucius in China, and Siddhartha the Buddha in India. So, who are these men? Why do we see their ideas of how to move forward in a peaceful way roughly the same time? What kind of environment do they come from? What are their similarities? What are their differences? But today, I really kind of want to focus on similarities and also making connection to the things that we're dealing with right now with the protests in the streets and looking for peaceful resolutions and a way to understand how to find peace in a sea of angst and confusion and anxiety and fear, anger. So who are these guys? So both of these men become leaders of peaceful movements. Both of them come from what we call warring historians. The warring states period in each of their societies and civilizations. Now, your textbook does talk about the warring states period in China, but your textbook really doesn't talk about the warring states period in India. They're both very, very similar. They both have very similar characteristics. In both China and in India, you have regional kingdoms. And when you see in China, we have the Zhou dynasty, the Qin dynasty. When you see those dynasties decline, what you're left with are lots of regional aristocracy, regional princes who are trying to vie for power and become the next emperor of China. When we look at India, it's a very similar kind of situation, although no one's really ruling or trying to rule over all of the region and centralization of government like in China. But in both situations, the territories and the regions are fighting amongst themselves. And that is called the warring period in both China and India. Now, war does not only affect soldiers. War affects people, their economy, structures, infrastructure to get goods to and from one place to another. Nothing gets better in a war, all all what is the right word? Quality of life declines, all of it. No matter if you directly are fighting the war or you're indirectly living in a war-torn area. That's true even today. So after years of warring going on, or wars around you going on, there is a point at which people get extremely exhausted from all the fighting. The quality of life decreases exponentially, and people begin, leaders especially, there are different people who try to figure out what is happening, why is it happening, and how do we fix it. And that's where we see Confucius and where we see the Buddha. I'm going to move this up a little bit. Sorry if I'm wiggling around too much. So with regards to both of these men, so I want to do a little bit of similarities here. Both of these men rise up out of the ashes of war-torn regions, where people are really living in a very difficult environment and difficult situation. Both of these men are going to extrapolate, they're going to create a theory. One is, Buddhism they're both philosophies, actually. They're both a philosophical way of looking at the world in trying to understand why people are fighting amongst themselves, what makes people fight, how do we find order out of the chaos, or how do we even make order out of the chaos. But they're not trying to go outside of what is considered common theory of their time. So Confucius lives in a patriarchal society. And so does Buddha, although they are different. So in Confucianism, Confucius pulls from legalistic theories and ideas within the patriarchal society, the belief that anyone who has power has an obligation to use that power properly, to not be corrupt, and to utilize that power to protect the people and help govern them. And that if a person who has power, who is in a position of power, and it's always a man, his responsibility is to be the perfect gentleman, the perfect man. And that means that he has to not only take care of, watch over, and protect the people. He has an obligation. It's not a choice. He has an obligation to protect those people, to watch over, to take care of the people who are under him. So if that is a leader, then that leader has an obligation to his people. In return, those people have an obligation to the leader to trust in that leader and take care of that leader, and to follow their requests and their advice and whatever their leadership is. Now, Confucius defines that in 5 different types of relationship, but in 4 of those 5, this concept about obligation that must be practiced on the part of those who have the power to those who don't, but also a reciprocal obligation to support and respect the power to those who have power is part of it. The only relationship that is equal, according to Confucius, is friend-to-friend relationship. But all others, there is a responsibility and obligation, one, to look out over those who are less than them, and then those who are beneath them, they have an obligation to look up to them. And those series of relationships are what control human behavior, and through that control of human behavior, and with those expectations and obligations being the best standards any human being could be, it makes sense to Confucius that then if everyone participates in this, that there will be no more war. And he pulls his theories of relationships from the already existing belief system that they live in. Ancestral worship. So the oldest members of society are the ones with the most respect to the younger members of society. Now, Buddha does something very similar. He is taking his cues from Hinduism. And in Hinduism, it's a polytheistic religion. And also in Hinduism, the idea is not the self like we have in Judeo-Christian belief systems. The idea is that when you are released from the wheel of Dharma, you become nothing. You become one with the world. You lose your sense of individuality. Everything that theoretically makes you the person you are, like we all in the West, we look to ourselves, we are independent-minded. The sense of self is very, it is admired, it is deified in a way. I mean, those people who have a good sense of self do well, and when we see and in the end of days, when people die, who they are, whether they be in the flesh or spirit, but who they are, their self, their soul, goes to heaven or goes to hell. In Hinduism, there's no heaven or hell. The ideal ending for you would be to go off the wheel of Dharma and become nothing. So it's totally opposite of who we are. It's like this loss of self. So Buddha takes his philosophy from the cues of Hinduism, and he's looking for what is it that causes war to begin with? What is it that causes people to be miserable? What is it that makes people angry and fearful and ugly and have hatred one to the other? And what he comes up with is a philosophy, not a religion. Buddhism is only a religion in Tibet, where it's synchronized with the local deity, and then other localities where Buddha was synchronized with the local deity. But overall, Buddhism is also a philosophy, a way of living. And in Buddhism, what Buddha came up with, why people why people fight all the time, and why people are angry and fearful, is he says in his Four Noble Truths, the number one reason, why people are angry and miserable and unhappy is because life is suffering. Number one, life is suffering. Number two of the Four Noble Truths is the way to stop suffering is to stop desire. Number two is desire is the reason for suffering. Desire is the reason for suffering. Now, he's not talking about desire like, sexual desire. He's talking about, I want the latest and greatest. I'm not necessarily, I like where I am, but I want more. And we live in a world like that. And quite frankly, to be human is that, while you may be grateful and appreciative of where you are, the idea is that you want more. You want something better for the future. There's ambition. That's ambition. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. But in this regard, those ambition can be taken to a very bad level, greed, and this is what he calls suffering. And so to desire something is what causes suffering, that kind of deep desire. So in order to stop suffering, you have to stop desire. And in order to stop desire, you have to follow the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, in the Noble Eightfold Path, it's connected back to Hinduism in many ways. One of them mostly is mindfulness. Now, we use that word a lot. We be mindful of what you're doing, mind this, do the, but like so many words, we use words and we don't really understand the depth of the words we're using. Forgive. What does it mean to forgive? Does forgiveness really happen? Does it come from the heart? What is to turn the other cheek? Is it to, well, what is it? I mean, is it just a saying? Or is it a feeling that's deep, deep down inside of you that understands why you're turning, why you're changing, why you do what you're doing? That's part of mindfulness, being aware, self-aware. Now, that's super easy to say. Those are easy words to say, but really in practice, it's not so easy. And we all know it. I mean, people who practice mindfulness and meditate know it. But I think that it's very important that we do this. And not because of Buddha or to become Buddhist or any of this kind of stuff. But mindfulness meditation, practicing mindful meditation, we've been doing throughout all of history. What is prayer? Is prayer simply sitting down and saying, "Oh, I wish I could meet Beyonce, or I wish I could do something. I wish he'd love me or she'd love me," or that's not really prayer. Is prayer really about seeking not just forgiveness from God, but what is it? What's in that seeking? What's the depth of feeling that you have, that you're bringing to the table in that request? So that meditation has been part of all religious factions, really. And so Buddha takes what people already practice and incorporates it into Buddhism as a way to practice this mindfulness to the end, to meet the ends of to try and get away from suffering from desire. Rethink what you're thinking. Be mindful of what you're doing. So when you're driving a car, drive the car. Don't answer the text. Focus on the traffic. Focus on what you're doing. You're using an active mind. You're thinking about what it is you're doing. When you're washing dishes, focus on washing dishes, not what you're going to do next after you finish washing dishes. If you're mowing the lawn, instead of thinking about, I wish I wasn't mowing the lawn, or after I mow the lawn, I'm going to think about mowing the lawn. Look at those lines in the grass. Think about what it is you're doing. And this may seem very, very boring, but in reality, it is quieting the mind. And in quieting the mind, then you begin to practice mindful meditation, because our minds are running quick all the time now, especially with smartphones and devices, and we have things yesterday. We can go Google up Amazon, boom, and we get some. So we're always used to rush. But mindfulness meditation is slowing it down, and by slowing it down, we get back into thinking and pondering about. It slows our mind down away from all of the shiny things that attract us, that cause us to desire, that cause us to suffer. And we're able to regroup and be calmer and better able to handle the things that life throws at us. So both of these men are looking at their already existing practices within their communities to find an answer to why people fight and argue, and why there is so much hatred and misunderstanding in the world. And here we are in 2020, and we're still studying these dudes. So 1,500 years later, we're still studying them, and both of them had huge impacts on society. Buddhism begins in India, and it spreads to China, and then from China it spreads to Japan and into Korea. Confucianism starts in China, and it spreads to Japan and Korea as well. And I think that, both of these philosophies speak a lot to different aspects and characteristics of what it is to be a human being. I do believe that with Confucianism, the concept of obligation to take care of those who need to be taken care of. It's not, I want to. It's not, oh, if I don't do this, I'm going to go to hell. If I'm being good, I'll go to heaven. If I do take care of people. It's really about, in that moment, to be a whole human being, to be the best at being a human being that you can be, is to understand relationships between people, and to understand that those who have power, those who are in leadership, they're obligated. They're obligated to take care of those who are beneath them, and obligated in a way that shows the best in humanity. To be a gentleman. You can read all kinds of stuff on Confucius, and you'll find that to be a real man is a man who writes poetry, who creates art, who measures how you speak. What are the words that you're using to explain yourself? It is, in a way, being very mindful and aware of who you are and how you are responding to the people around you, and if you are acting in a proper way. It is this expectation of obligation to do the right thing. Buddha says there's an expectation on each and every one of us to look at this and follow this Noble Eightfold Path, to understand within ourselves that desire leads to suffering, and that we need to be more mindful of our behavior so that we don't desire things that are outside of our reach. We don't desire things that cause havoc, that cause confusion, that make us behave in a way that is not being the best at who we can be. And by being at our best, we are able to follow our dharma, or really being our best is really karma. You can have good karma, bad karma, but that's a different story, and as far and typical with what I'm saying, or in line with what I'm saying, there's more depth to both of those words than we would like to, than we would actually use in modern world. But we follow what is right and what is the best in all human beings. So Buddha and Confucius both have similarities. Their presentation and the way that you practice their philosophies are different. But there are a lot of similarities in that the expectation is that your intentions to do the right thing are both there in both of these philosophies. And the practice, while they may be different, like I say, the intention is the same. So with that being said, I want you to look around right now at the world that we live in here in 2020, the Black Lives Matter movement, and what is happening with the change of narrative, the evaluation of why does systemic racism still exist in the United States and in many places around the world. We've known this for hundreds of years, and here we are in a place similar to Well, there are aspects that we could connect to the warring states. We're trying to find out what is it that makes us hate? What is it that causes so much disruption? Why do people continue to act on their most debased selves? Why isn't there a standard of care and obligation to each individual? And why don't we, especially the individuals who we're supposed to protect, like the police would, under Confucius, they would be the leadership. And they now have, under Confucianism, they would have an obligation to be their best selves in order to I'm sorry, there was a phone came in. They would have to be at their best selves in order to exercise their obligation to protect people. And then within Buddhism, Buddhism would say that something deep down, they're not being mindful of what it is they're doing. They're not recognizing, or if they're recognizing, they're not acting on what they see. If a person is laying down in the street, Buddha would say, well, are you now thinking, are you mindful that your next move, what you do next, is recognizing the situation you're in, not making it worse, but in fact addressing it? So there are similarities between how we look at the world right now and what is our response to what we're seeing around us. What can we draw from our own environment, from our the way we believe, Christianity, Judaism, Islam? Do any of those practice racism? No, they don't. They practice jihad, or this inner conflict between people or within themselves, primarily between, am I a good person or am I bad? What are the expectations of being a good person? Why would I want to be a good person? How can I be a good human being? All three of those major religions, believe it or not, follow the same God. And so the basic principles are the same. In none of them is it okay to lie, cheat, and steal. In none of them is it okay to murder a person. There's a lot of similarities between the expectations and the obligations of people who have power under Confucius, the people who are everyday people thinking about what it is they're doing and why they're doing it in Buddhism, and who we are and how we're acting today. So my question, this discussion board question is, evaluate what is going on today and utilizing the Noble Eightfold Path and thinking about Confucius and expectations of relationships. How do you see going forward with how to rectify the wrongs of that have been caused because of the wars within ourselves of racism, and how do we find equity and balance within all communities, Black and white especially, in our current environment? Okay, so that's the question. How do you how do you rectify this? How do you try to make it better? Now, just like Buddhists and Confucius, they took from their systems to create a theory or a philosophy to address trying to find equity and control of human, getting everybody out from warring from one another. How do we do that? What are the things in our society that are already present that we can be mindful of, that we can think about, that can address the issues that we have? Now, I do want you to know that, so this is a pretty hot button topic, but I do think that we can relate the two. And my question to you, what I expect from you is, number one, if you curse, I don't mind you writing in a few curse words here and there, but not at anybody. You can describe a situation, and if you're angry, you can definitely use your words and write them on paper in the discussion board with passion. But we have to be mindful of each other's ideas and beliefs. Remember also that you're not going to convince another person that your way is the best way of thinking. So I don't want you to try to do that. I want you to think. How do I think this can be resolved, these things? Where's the first step? Not total resolution, because social issues, just like almost anything, takes time, and it requires people to rethink the way they are. They have to rethink why they believe what they believe. And that's one of the things I'm asking you right now. How do you see the world right now? Where do you think it's going to go? Pull from what you've been raised with. And be mindful that other people won't believe the same as you. And if anyone is ugly to another person, this will not be acceptable, okay? This will not be acceptable. This is not an exercise to try and just rail against the machine or rail against one group or another. Both Buddha and Confucius lived during warring times. Both of them thought deeply, and wholeheartedly about how to make things better. Both of them pulled from resources they already knew. Both of them came up with ideas that were right for their group, or mostly, it worked. We're still talking about it. Were there flaws? Of course. There's nothing that's going to be perfect and ideal, but it's a start. We're having the conversation, and now we can see, hopefully, the connections between you in this moment. How do you think about this? How do you pull from what you've been taught? How do we move forward as a community? Because both Buddha and Confucius were looking at the greater community through their individual introspection and reflection of what they believed was going to help their whole community. Now, I hope I made this clear. I'm going to say it one more time. How would you resolve? What are some of the ways you could think to resolve and address the current issues, Black Lives Matter, the police brutality in our world right now, by looking back and looking into what our society teaches us, religious beliefs, social beliefs, expectations, things that you've been taught through your life? How do you use what's already present in society, using your own introspection and reflection to come up with a concept for the greater good, just like Buddha and Confucius? You may utilize different aspects of Buddhism and Confucianism in your analysis and your what you think might work. Again, I do not need, and nobody, I want, even if this is a big thing, so come up with one idea of what you think would make things better. Okay? I'm around if you need me. Give me shoot me an email, and I'm here for you. Okay. So good luck with that, and I look forward to reading what you guys have to say. Okay. All right. Remember, initial post is due Saturday. Remaining posts due by Tuesday. It's currently up to speed in the module, and remember, after you post your initial post, you have to post 2 more uh, response posts to 2 classmates in order to earn the full 40 points. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.